quickly! Your sister needs help! Please, hurry!
Han Seo-yeon had learned a long time ago that the world didn't notice women like her, the soft ones, the heavy ones, the ones who carried trays through the dead hours while the city slept and dreamed of nobody. At 27, she wore $80,000 of her dead mother's hospital debt like a second skin, and the mirror in her cramped Gurodong studio had stopped being a friend years ago. So when she clocked into the graveyard shift at a battered diner in Yeongdeokpo on a sleet-soaked Tuesday in February, she expected nothing but cold coffee, a rude manager, and the familiar ache of being invisible. What she didn't expect was the sound. It came from behind the storage door out back, the one that was always padlocked from the outside, a thin and ragged whimper threading through the howl of a Seoul winter wind that cut straight to the bone. Seo-yeon could have walked away. A smarter woman, a safer woman, would have pretended she hadn't heard a thing. Instead, she pried that lock loose with shaking hands and found a girl no older than 15, folded against the concrete in a torn designer coat, far too pale, far too still. Years of nursing school she never got to finish kicked in before the fear did, and Seo-yeon dropped to her knees in the cold and pressed her hands to the wound. The girl's eyes fluttered, glassy and terrified, and she gripped Seo-yeon's wrist with a strength that didn't belong to someone so close to gone. "No police," she rasped. "Call him. My pocket. Call him." Inside the ruined coat, Seo-yeon found a single phone, its screen webbed with cracks, and on it exactly one name, Jun-ho. She pressed call, and a voice answered before the first ring finished. Low and smooth, and somehow colder than the February air. A voice like silk laid over the edge of a blade. It didn't say hello. It said, "Where is she?" And it wasn't a question. It was a command that pressed down on her chest like a hand. Seo-yeon stammered out the address, the alley, the girl, and the voice told her not to call anyone, not to move, that he'd be there in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, by sheer coincidence. He had been in Gangnam handling business only moments away, and when the blacked-out armored SUV rolled to the curb without a single sound, the clock had barely moved. The man who stepped out didn't hurry. He didn't have to. Kang Jun-ho was 37 and built like a closed door. All sharp angles and tailored menace. A billionaire whose name sat on glass towers across Seoul and whose other name was whispered in places far below them. His eyes were a flat, exhausted grey. The eyes of a man who'd buried everyone he'd ever loved and decided that feeling things was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. He crossed 50 feet of wet asphalt in what felt like a blink, knelt beside the girl, and the ice in him cracked just enough to show the brother underneath. Then those grey eyes lifted and landed on Seo-yeon, kneeling there in the cold beside his sister. And she understood in that single frozen second that she'd just seen something a woman like her was never meant to walk away from. She'd stepped outside to take out the trash. She'd stepped straight into a war she didn't know was being fought, and the man standing over her was the one who ran it. Before we go any further, if a story about a forgotten woman and a ruthless man both learning what a person is truly worth is the kind of thing you're here for, do me a favor and tap that like button right now. Share this with someone who loves a dark and tender romance and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single chapter. Now let's head back to that freezing alley where Seo-yeon is still kneeling beside the girl and the most dangerous man in Seoul is deciding what to do with the only witness who refused to run. For one long, breathless moment, no one moved. Seo-yeon was still kneeling on the freezing concrete, her trembling hands pressed hard against the young girl's wound, and Kang Jun-ho's grey eyes remained fixed on her like two nails, pinning her to that very spot. She could hear her own heart pounding in her ears, drowning out even the wind shrieking through the alley. Then he spoke, his voice still carrying that dangerously smooth edge, but this time lower, almost nothing more than a breath. "What did you see?" It wasn't a question. It was a door, slowly closing, and Seo-yeon understood that her answer would decide whether she would be allowed to walk out of this alley or not. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Jun-ho didn't wait. He turned his head toward the SUV, and with only a slight lift of his chin, two men dressed in black slipped out of the darkness, moving so silently it was as though the ground didn't exist beneath their feet. One of them carried a metal medical case, and when he knelt on the other side of the young girl facing Seo-yeon, she realized he was an older man, his graying hair neatly combed, his gloved hands already working before his knees had fully touched the ground. "Let go, girl," he said, his voice calm enough to chill the blood, the calm of a man who had done this far too many times. "Slowly. Keep the pressure steady until I tell you." Seo-yeon swallowed hard and obeyed, shifting her hands away inch by inch while his gloved hands slid in to take her place. "Dr. Park Min-suk," Jun-ho said quietly behind her, as though introducing a name was the last thing that mattered tonight. "He'll take care of her. Step back." But Seo Yeon didn't step back. She couldn't explain why, not even to herself, but her hand still lingered on the young girl's shoulder, her fingers still resting lightly against that icy skin, as though trying to keep some fragile thread from snapping. Dr. Park glanced at her for a second, and there was something in that look almost like surprise. He didn't tell her to leave again. "Pulse is weak, but it's there," he muttered, opening a syringe and flicking the air bubbles from the needle with one neat snap of his finger. "Someone gave her something, a high dose. If you hadn't found her when you did, then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Seo Yeon felt her insides twist tight. This young girl should have died alone behind a storage room door, locked from the outside with no one in the world knowing. Dr. Park pushed the needle in, and almost immediately the girl's breathing deepened a little, steadied a little. Her pale eyelids fluttered. But Jun-ho was no longer looking at his sister. He was looking at Seo Yeon, and in the thick silence of the alley, she could almost hear the cold machinery inside his mind turning. He was weighing her the way someone weighs a number on a balance sheet, a variable that might need to be removed. "Han Seo Yeon," she answered, her voice breaking. "I work here as a server. I was just finishing my shift and—" "The girl told me to call. She begged me not to call the police." Seo Yeon heard her own voice, rising thin and shaky in the space between them. "I don't know anything, I swear. I don't know who you are. I don't know what's happening. I just couldn't let her die alone on the concrete." Something passed across Jun-ho's face, so quickly that if Seo Yeon had blinked, she would have missed it. He took one step toward her, and the pressure in the air seemed to change direction, pressing down heavily on her shoulders. "Do you understand," he said, each word falling slowly like drops of freezing water, "that in my world, people who witness what you witnessed tonight usually don't live to see the next morning?" Seo Yeon lifted her eyes to him. She should have cried, should have begged, should have run. But she was too exhausted, too used to the world wanting her to disappear, and the fear inside her had drained away into something almost calm. Then she said softly, both hands still stained with his sister's blood, "At least let me keep her alive first before you decide what to do with me." And for the first time on that freezing night, Kang Jun-ho, the most dangerous man in Seoul, the man who had buried everything he had ever loved, couldn't find a single word to answer. The silence stretched on until it was broken by a faint sound. A small gasp from the young girl lying between them. Those pale eyelids trembled, then opened slightly, and a pair of dark brown eyes, clouded by trauma and fear, slowly found their way back to the world. "Oppa," the young girl whispered, her voice so hoarse it almost dissolved into the wind. Jun-ho dropped to his knees at once, the ice inside him shattering so quickly Seo Yeon could almost hear it crack. And the voice that had once been cold as a blade now broke open into something raw, trembling, almost human. "I'm here now. You're safe." But Kang Ha-yeon's eyes weren't searching for her brother. They slipped past him, feeling through the darkness until they found Seo Yeon's face, and the child's small, icy hand crept upward, trembling, closing around Seo Yeon's wrist once more. "She didn't run," Ha-yeon whispered. A tear slid from the corner of her eye, trailing down her pale temple. "I opened my eyes and everyone was gone. Everyone. But she knelt down beside me. She held my hand. She didn't run, Oppa." Seo Yeon felt her throat tighten painfully. She gently squeezed those small fingers. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. Just breathe, okay? Just breathe." And when she looked up, she found Jun-ho watching her, not with the cold, measuring gaze of a man calculating a variable anymore. Something in that sharp face had stopped, had softened, as though he had just collided with something the cold machinery inside his head didn't know how to process. Kindness, unconditional kindness that asked for nothing from a woman who had no reason to stay, from someone his world should have taught to run for years. Everything Jun-ho touched had come with a price, a motive, an invisible string pulling somewhere underneath. But this woman had knelt in snow and blood for a young girl she had never met, and she wanted nothing. He opened his mouth, though even he didn't know what he meant to say. When that sound cut across the alley, applause, slow, steady, mocking echoing from the mouth of the alley where the streetlight spilled into a dirty pool of light, Jun-ho rose to his feet. And in a single instant the brother vanished and the predator returned. Three shadows separated from the dark, standing in a line to block the exit. They wore dark clothing and heavy leather coats, moving with the leisurely confidence of men who believed they held the upper hand. The one in the middle, a tall man with an angular face and a smile that never reached his eyes, stopped clapping. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying a rough Gyeongsang accent, drawing out each word as though savoring it. "The king of the Han River himself, crawling into a filthy alley in Yongdeong. We followed the girl, but we didn't expect to catch you too, Kang. No royal guards with you. Junho's eyes narrowed into two slits of ice. Since when does Bake send children to do a man's work? The man's smile vanished. We're hungry and you're old, slow, and far too confident. His gaze dropped to Ha-yun, then shifted to Seo Yeon, and that look made gooseflesh rise across Seo Yeon's skin. Hand over the girl, and maybe we'll let your little serve alive. Maybe. Junho didn't move, but when he spoke, his voice had fallen into a register so low it seemed to vibrate through the frozen air. You, he said softly without turning his head. It took Seo Yeon a second to realize he was speaking to her. Hold, Ha-yun. Get in the car. Lock the doors. And no matter what happens, don't look out the window. Seo Yeon looked at the three shadows at the mouth of the alley, then at the young girl trembling in her arms, then at the broad back of the man who had just placed himself between her and death. And she understood that the door she had stepped through tonight would never open backward again. Seo Yeon didn't think for even one more second. She slid both arms beneath Ha-yun, and Dr. Park was already beside her, supporting the young girl's upper body with his quiet, practiced skill. Together they lifted her. Ha-yun felt frighteningly light in Seo Yeon's arms, weakened by the harrowing ordeal, and Seo Yeon clenched her teeth, dragging herself toward the black SUV with her heart pounding hard inside her chest. Behind her, she heard the rival man's voice rise again, sharp and cold, telling them to grab the girl. And then the whole alley exploded into motion. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. She rushed toward the rear door of the vehicle, already open, pushed Ha-yun into the warm, dark leather of the cabin, then threw herself in after her. A silent driver in the front seat reached back and slammed the door shut. The sounds outside vanished as though someone had pressed a button. The armored cabin swallowed every noise, leaving only Seo Yeon's own gasping breaths and Ha-yun's faint moan as the girl's head sagged against her shoulder. But through the dark-tinted glass, she still saw, even though she had been told not to look. She couldn't help looking. Kang Junho was no longer merely a man in a suit standing in an alley. He was something faster than that, more final than that, a black shadow moving among three attackers with the cold efficiency of someone who saw violence as nothing more than an equation that needed to be solved. Seo Yeon saw the leader rush forward, saw Junho lean aside cleanly like water sliding past stone, saw one strike, then another. One figure after another dropped onto the wet alley floor like puppets with their strings cut. The whole thing lasted only a few seconds. When it was over, Junho stood alone in the alley, his chest rising and falling slowly, steam lifting from his shoulders in the cold. He bent down to pick something up from the ground with a calm so unnerving it chilled the blood. Then he turned toward the vehicle. The front door opened. Lee Min-ho slipped behind the wheel, and the rear door beside Seo Yeon swung open, letting in a rush of icy air along with the smell of rain and the smell of what had just happened. Junho sat down beside her. Suddenly, the spacious cabin became so cramped it was hard to breathe. "Drive, Min-ho," he said quietly. "Hanam-dong, take the long way." The vehicle rolled forward smoothly, leaving the alley behind as though it had never existed. Seo Yeon sat pressed against the opposite door, holding Ha-yun tightly. And now, as the panic began to drain away, another kind of trembling rose to replace it. She looked at the man beside her, at the angled line of his face beneath the streetlights, sliding past the window. Something in her memory stirred. She had seen this face before, not in real life, but on the worn cover of a magazine someone had left behind on the diner counter. Beneath a headline about the richest men in Seoul, Kang Junho, real estate billionaire, technology magnate, the reclusive man who owned half the glass towers in Gangnam. The magazine had called him a ruthless, brilliant reformer. They had forgotten to mention that he could bring down three men in an alley within a few seconds and then calmly get into a car as though he had just left a meeting. Seo Yeon tightened her hold on Ha-yun, her voice trembling when she finally found it again. "I helped you. I saved the girl. Please just drop me at the next corner." "I won't say a word. I don't know anything." Junho drew a silk handkerchief from inside his jacket and carefully wiped his hands clean, finger by finger, without the slightest hurry. "I'm afraid that is no longer an option, Miss Han," he said. His voice had returned to that smooth, cold, low sound, though now it carried something decisive enough to feel almost desperate. "They saw your face. They saw you beside Ha-yun. Before morning, every man loyal to the Bake family in this city will be looking for the woman who was in that alley. You can't go home. You can't go anywhere. The only place on earth where you will still be alive by morning is the place I'm taking you." Seo Yeon stared at him as the truth of this shattered night finally sank into her bones. "You're kidnapping me," she whispered. The corner of Junho's mouth lifted slightly, a dark smile with no warmth in it, though not quite cruelty either. "I prefer to call it protection," he said, Try not to bleed on the seats, Miss Han. The drive north passed in a heavy silence, broken only by the low murmur of tires over wet pavement and the faint breathing of Ha-yun as she fell asleep against Seo Yeon's shoulder. When the vehicle finally left the main road and slipped onto a private road running deep between rows of bare trees, Seo Yeon saw the gate. It emerged from the darkness like something belonging to another world. Tall, black, without the slightest trace of show, it opened before them, then closed behind them with a finality that made her shiver. The mansion stood above the Han River, a long stretch of glass and dark stone laid out through the night, every window lit yet giving off no warmth at all. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress pretending to be a home. Seo Yeon counted at least 4 men dressed in dark clothing scattered through the shadows as the vehicle glided into a stone courtyard, each of them carrying the quiet, watchful posture she was beginning to recognize. The posture of men always waiting for the worst. The car door opened and a blast of cold air from the river swept in. Junho stepped out first, lifting Ha-yun from Seo Yeon's arms with a gentleness so unexpected it startled her, as though the girl were made of glass. Then he tipped his head for Seo Yeon to follow. Inside, everything was vast and cold. The polished granite floors reflected the ceiling lights like frozen water. The towering walls hung with works of art Seo Yeon suspected were worth more than her entire life put together. An older woman appeared at the foot of the staircase, her silver hair pinned neatly, her back perfectly straight, her face stern, yet there was something alive and warm in her eyes that the rest of this house seemed to lack. Mrs. Kim, Junho said, placing Ha-yun into the woman's arms with obvious trust. A bake ambush, she was drugged, but Dr. Park stabilized her. Take her to her room and prepare the guest room in the east wing for our guest. Mrs. Kim Sunja's eyes moved over Seo Yeon, pausing on the bloodstained server's uniform, the wet hair clinging to her face, the trembling shape of her body. A flash of surprise appeared in that gaze before it was quickly hidden behind professional composure. Yes, Master Kang, she said. Then she lifted Ha-yun with surprising strength for a woman her age and disappeared up the stairs. When her footsteps faded, Dr. Park entered from behind them, taking off his coat and setting the medical case on a nearby table. Seo Yeon stood in the middle of that enormous room, feeling absurdly small and out of place, and at last she blurted out the question that had been gnawing at her the entire ride. Why am I here? You said they saw my face, fine, but you could have left me anywhere. You could have taken me to a police station, a motel, anywhere. Why here? Junho didn't answer at once. Dr. Park was the one who spoke, his voice calm and direct, the voice of a man used to explaining unpleasant truths. Because you saw too much, Miss Han, and because you're the only living person who looked tonight's attackers in the face and survived to tell it. In this world, a witness like that is both a liability and an asset, depending on who holds her. He paused, glancing toward the staircase where Ha-yun had just been carried away. But there is something else. That child just went through something horrific. She woke up in an alley, abandoned, certain she was about to die, and the only person who stayed with her, the only person she trusted in that moment was you. After what she has endured, that trust isn't something we can manufacture. She will need you in ways even her brother can't replace. Seo Yeon turned to look at Junho. This time he was watching her with something she couldn't read, a mixture of cold calculation and something else, something deeper, something even he seemed unwilling to admit. You are not a prisoner here, Miss Han, he said quietly. But you are not free yet either. Rest. By morning you will understand just how dangerous the world you have stepped into truly is. Seo Yeon slept fitfully in a room larger than the ground floor of her apartment on sheets so soft they made her feel like an imposter. When she woke in the morning, it took her several seconds to remember that last night had not been a nightmare. A set of clean clothes sat neatly folded on a chair, fitting her so perfectly it was frightening. A cup of tea, still steaming, rested on the bedside table, though she had not heard anyone bring it in. She showered, dressed, and followed a silent servant down the staircase, where Junho was waiting for her in a dark study. He sat behind a large desk with a row of screens casting cold blue light across his face. Did you sleep? He asked without looking up. I want to make a phone call, Seo Yeon said, standing straight, even though her knees were still trembling, to my landlord, to my manager at the diner. They'll be worried. I have bills to pay. I have a life, no matter how small you think it is, and I can't just disappear. Junho was silent for a long moment. Then he tapped a key on the keyboard and turned one of the screens toward her. I'm afraid that life is no longer there for you to return to, he said quietly. Seo Yeon looked at the screen. It was surveillance footage, grey and white. with a timestamp in the lower corner showing 4:15 that morning. She recognized it instantly. It was the second-floor hallway of the old apartment building in Gurodong where she had lived for the past 3 years. The peeling wallpaper, the light at the far end of the hall that always flickered. And then she saw the door to her apartment burst open, splintering into pieces. 3 large shadows stepped out from inside. Their faces were blurred by the low-resolution camera, but their walk was impossible to mistake. That dangerous, leisurely gait she had seen in the alley. One of them was holding something in his hand. Seo-yeon recognized with a twist in her gut that it was the old sweater she always left draped over the back of her chair, the only thing she still had from her nursing school days. "They came looking for you less than 2 hours after you left the alley," Junho said, his voice level, without pity, but not cruel either, only the naked truth. "They tore your apartment apart down to the walls. And when they didn't find you," he paused for the first time. There was the faintest hesitation in his voice. "Your landlord heard the noise. He came out to see what was happening. I'm sorry, Miss Han. He didn't survive." Seo-yeon's whole world tilted. She grabbed the arm of the nearest leather chair to keep herself from collapsing. A name slipped from her lips in a broken breath. "Mr. Park." She closed her eyes. The image of the old man with the silver-white mustache rose before her. The man who always let her pay rent a few days late without complaint. The man who had fixed her heater last winter without taking a single one. He had died because of her, because she had chosen to stay and help that night instead of running away. "If you had gone home last night," Junho said softly, rising and walking around the desk, "you would be the one lying there. Do you understand now, Miss Han? This is not an inconvenience you can wait out. The Baek family doesn't leave living loose ends behind. You have no home to return to, no job to go back to, no corner of Seoul that is safe for you anymore." Seo-yeon opened her eyes. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally spilled over, hot and furious. "So this is all I have left. A beautiful cage with clothes that fit too well and tea I never asked for. A place where you are still breathing," Junho answered, and he laid down his rules in a voice that allowed no argument. She was not to leave the estate grounds without him. She was not to contact anyone in the outside world, and she was never to go down to the lower basement levels. Seo-yeon listened to all of it, tears still sliding down her face. For the first time, she understood that sometimes survival and captivity were simply 2 names for the same thing. The first days in the mansion passed like a strange dream Seo-yeon couldn't wake from, and the only thing that kept her from breaking completely was Ha-yun. The girl recovered with astonishing speed under Dr. Park's care. By the 3rd day, she could sit up in her sun-filled room, though she was still pale and quiet. Seo-yeon found herself drawn toward that room as though led by an invisible thread, and Ha-yun, instead of pushing her away as Seo-yeon had half feared, lit up every time she walked in. They began with small things, a card game, an old movie on the enormous flat screen. And little by little, Seo-yeon realized that beneath the shell of a billionaire's sister was only a painfully ordinary 15-year-old girl. A girl who loved dance trends online, complained about the bodyguards always standing outside her door, and was lonely in the way only children raised in houses too large and too cold could understand. One afternoon, Seo-yeon walked in and found Ha-yun curled on the bed, her phone lying face down on her chest, her eyes red and swollen. It took a long while of gentle coaxing before the girl finally turned the phone over and showed Seo-yeon. They were comments, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, beneath a video she had posted weeks earlier, before the night in the alley. Cruel words about her face, about her body, about the way she laughed. "They said I'm ugly," Ha-yun whispered, her voice breaking. "They said I should disappear. I know I shouldn't read them. I know that, but I keep reading them over and over. It's like if they say it enough times, it'll become true." Seo-yeon sat down on the edge of the bed. Something old and painful woke inside her chest, something she had thought she had buried long ago. She took Ha-yun's small hand. "You know," she said softly, "I spent almost my whole life believing those exact things. That I was too full-figured, too quiet, too plain for anyone to see. I carried coffee through rooms full of people and not one of them ever looked up. I looked in the mirror and saw only all the things the world told me I was missing. And do you know how long it took me to understand one thing?" Ha-yun shook her head, her wet eyes fixed on Seo-yeon's face. "To understand that a person's worth has never lived in how they look to people who don't even bother to understand them," Seo-yeon said. "The night I found you in that alley, I didn't kneel down because you were beautiful or famous or perfect. I knelt down because you were a human being, and a human being deserves someone to stay beside them. That is the truth about you that no comment can ever touch. The people who write those words are speaking from their own fear, sweetheart. They were never really speaking about you." Ha-yun burst into tears, this time not because of the words on the screen. She leaned into Seo Yeon, burying her face against her shoulder. Seo Yeon held her and rocked her gently, the way she had once wished someone would have done for her when she was little. She didn't hear the door, didn't know that Junho had been standing there in the darkness of the hallway for some time, one hand resting lightly on the frame, watching in silence. He had come to check on his sister, as he did every evening, but now he stood still, unable to step in, unable to walk away. For years he had given Ha-Yun everything money could buy, every layer of protection, every comfort, and he had believed that was enough to keep her safe, but he had never known how to touch her loneliness. Had never found the words this woman had just spoken as naturally as breathing. He watched Seo Yeon hold his sister, the woman he had dragged into this world like a chess piece, the woman the outside world had taught itself to treat as invisible. And for the first time in many years, something inside Kang Junho's frozen chest stirred, painful, unfamiliar, like a joint long locked in ice beginning to move again. That night, Seo Yeon couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs through the stillness of the sleeping house, looking for something to drink, and she found Junho in the library, a two-story room paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books. He sat alone in the firelight with a glass of amber liquor he hadn't touched. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Perhaps he had heard her footsteps before she even arrived. "You can't sleep either," he said, not as a question. Seo Yeon hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside and sat down in the armchair across from him, the fire burning between them. In that shifting light, his sharp, cold face seemed to soften. For the first time, she noticed the deep weariness carved around his eyes, not the exhaustion of one sleepless night, but of many years. "I saw you with Ha-Yun this afternoon," he said, after a long while, his eyes still fixed on the flames. "What you said to her." "I was standing outside the door." Seo Yeon felt heat rise into her cheeks. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "Don't," he interrupted quietly. "I've tried to say things like that to her for months. I've never found the words. I don't know how." He turned the glass in his hand, the firelight dancing in the amber liquid. "I used to have a family that knew how to do those things. I don't. Not anymore." Seo Yeon kept silent, sensing that this was something fragile and one wrong word could shatter it. Junho stared into the fire for a long time before continuing. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, the voice of a man reading back a sentence he had memorized long ago. "Ha-Yun is 22 years younger than I am. I practically raised her alone because 8 years ago, the Baek family came for my family, and when it was over, there was only me and a 7-year-old child left." He paused, a muscle in his jaw twitched. "My parents and my wife. I wasn't there. I was across Seoul handling a deal I thought mattered at the time. By the time I got home, it was too late for everyone except her. She hid in a closet. She heard everything. She was only 7. Seo Yeon lifted a hand to cover her mouth. Something in her chest tightened painfully. "Junho," she whispered, his name slipping out before she could think. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry for me," he said, but there was no sharpness in it, only exhaustion. "I've done things since that night that you shouldn't pity. I became what I had to become to keep her alive and to make the people who did that afraid. I froze everything inside me that could ever be hurt again because pain is a luxury a man in my position can't afford. I thought I had frozen it all. Then you walked into a filthy alley to take out the trash." He looked up. Those grey eyes caught the firelight, no longer cold but warmed into a smoky haze. "You knelt in the snow for a child you had never met. You wanted nothing. In my world, no one does anything without a price. I had forgotten people like you still existed." Seo Yeon sat very still, her heart pounding inside her chest, painfully aware of the small distance between them, of the warmth of the fire, and the weight of his gaze. She had come here as a prisoner, had feared this man, had seen him bring others down without blinking. But now she was looking at something else, a man who had built himself a fortress of ice around his heart, only so he would never have to bury anyone again. And she realized with a clarity that frightened her that she no longer saw him as a monster. She saw him as a human being, a deeply wounded one, and that was far more dangerous than fear. "You should go to sleep, Seo Yeon," he said softly. For the first time, he called her by her name instead of her family name, but neither of them moved, and the fire went on burning between them through the long night. In the days that followed, Seo Yeon began to notice that something was not right with Ha-Yun. The girl still clung to her, still laughed at old movies and card games, but there were moments when Seo Yeon caught her suddenly falling silent, her gaze drifting out the window toward the cold grey Han River, her hands clenched tightly together in her lap. Each time Seo Yeon asked, Ha-yoon only shook her head and forced a smile, but that smile never reached her eyes. Then one late evening, when Seo Yeon brought a cup of hot chocolate up to the girl's room, she found Ha-yoon curled in the corner of the bed in the dark, and this time, when the girl looked up, her face was twisted by something Seo Yeon recognized at once, because she had carried it her whole life. Guilt. It was my fault, Ha-yoon whispered, and once those words began to pour out, they couldn't be stopped. That night in the alley. Everyone keeps talking like I'm the victim, like I didn't do anything wrong. But that's not true. I went out by myself. I snuck out that night. No one kidnapped me from my bed. Seo Yeon set the hot chocolate down and sat beside her. She said nothing, only let the silence open wide enough for the girl to step into it. There was someone, Ha-yoon continued, her voice trembling, online a few weeks ago. At first it was just normal messages. They said they knew who I was, knew my family had money, but they said it in a way that was kind, like they understood me. They told me I didn't have to live behind these walls forever, that there was a way for me to have my own freedom, my own money, a life where Junho didn't control every minute. They promised they would help me. They said if I came out to meet them just once, they would show me how. She swallowed hard. Tears fell onto her hands. I was so stupid. I was tired of being lonely all the time, tired of being watched all the time. So I snuck out, and when I got to the meeting place, it wasn't who I thought it was. It was their men. The whole thing was a trap from the beginning. They never wanted to help me. They wanted to use me to catch Junho. Seo Yeon felt her insides go cold as the truth took shape before her. This had not been some random kidnapping off the street. Ha-yoon had been targeted, studied, lured out with the very things a lonely girl longed for most: freedom, understanding, a way out, and for someone to know those exact things about Ha-yoon, to know her schedule, which walls guarded her, which weakness lived inside her heart. Whoever stood behind it must have known far too much about the world inside these walls. A cold thought began to kindle in Seo Yeon's mind. Vague, frightening, this trap could not have been set only from the outside, but she pushed it aside. Because right now Ha-yoon didn't need a detective. Ha-yoon needed a human being. Look at me, Seo Yeon said softly, placing a hand against the girl's tear-soaked cheek. Listen to me. You didn't cause this. The people who did it are the kind of people who search for lonely, wounded children, read that loneliness and turn it into a hook. That is what they do. That is their sin, not yours. Wanting freedom is not a crime. Wanting someone to understand you is not a crime. You were just a child who wanted to be seen. And they used the most beautiful thing in you to hurt you. Ha-yoon broke down, sobbing. Seo Yeon pulled her close, holding her tightly. But Junho will hate me, the girl choked out. If he knows I snuck out, he loves you, Ha-yoon, Seo Yeon whispered, though inside her that cold thought was still burning low. And forgiving someone doesn't mean they never fell. It means they are still worthy of love even after they have fallen. You deserve that, I promise you. The strike came on another Tuesday night, exactly 3 weeks after the night in the alley, as though fate had a cruel sense of irony. Seo Yeon was in the vast industrial kitchen making herself a cup of chamomile tea. Ha-yoon was asleep upstairs. Junho was supposedly in a meeting with several of his men in the West Wing. Then suddenly every light in the mansion flickered and went dark. The dense silence of the house was torn apart by a sound that froze the blood in Seo Yeon's veins. The perimeter alarm shrieking in sharp, blaring waves. Emergency lights snapped on, bathing the kitchen in a pulsing red glow like the beat of a blood vessel. An automated voice rang through the speaker system, coldly repeating that the perimeter had been breached. Before Seo Yeon could understand what was happening, the enormous glass panes at the end of the dining room exploded inward. From the night and the rain, shadows poured in, dressed in tactical gear, moving with deadly expertise. Seo Yeon understood at once that this was no random break-in. The Baek family had brought war to the king's own door. She ducked behind the granite kitchen island as a sharp burst of gunfire ripped through the air above her head, and then she did the only thing her body knew how to do. She ran, she bolted toward the hallway leading downstairs, her bare feet slipping over the stone floor. In her panic, she slammed into a small table, sending a porcelain vase crashing down and shattering. She fell hard. A razor-sharp shard of porcelain sliced deep into her left calf. She cried out. Hot blood instantly spilled across the white stone, and when she lifted her head, her heart seemed to stop. One of the Baek attackers stood at the end of the hallway, the muzzle of his gun slowly rising, aiming straight at her. Seo Yeon didn't have time to run. She didn't even have time to scream. She only had time to see his finger tighten. Then something large hurled itself between her and the gun barrel. Seo Yeon! Junho's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. Then his whole body shielded her at the exact moment the shot rang out. Seo Yeon saw him jerk, saw his body stagger, a red stain spreading across the shoulder of his shirt. But he didn't fall. He wouldn't allow himself to fall. With a low, primitive sound rising from deep inside his chest, he lunged toward the man. What happened next moved too fast for Seo Yeon to follow. A series of precise, cold, final movements. Then the attacker collapsed. The others rushing in behind him fell one after another. When the last echo died away, Jun-ho stood in the middle of the hallway, one hand gripping his shoulder, his chest rising and falling, blood seeping between his fingers, but his eyes did not leave Seo Yeon for even a second. He staggered toward her, dropped to his knees beside her. His uninjured hand trembled as it rose to her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse, his eyes sweeping over her body for wounds before he even thought of himself. "Your leg! You're bleeding! You're the one who was shot!" Seo Yeon whispered, tears blurring her vision. Somehow her hand had lifted to press against his face. Her fingers brushed over that hard jaw with a tenderness that startled even her. "You took a bullet for me. Why would you do that? Why?" Jun-ho didn't answer. He only closed his eyes for a moment beneath her touch, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. Then Dr. Park was there, along with Mrs. Kim and the others. The old doctor's steady hands quickly examined the wound in Jun-ho's shoulder. The bullet went through the soft tissue, missed the bone, Dr. Park said, his voice filled with professional relief. "You were lucky, Master Kang. A few inches more, and this would have been different." They bandaged Jun-ho's shoulder and stitched the deep cut in Seo Yeon's leg right there in the kitchen, flooded with red light. Two people sitting side by side amid the wreckage. Through all of it, their eyes remained locked, finding a silent grounding strength in each other's presence. By morning, the Han River mansion was a battlefield of shattered glass and bullet-scarred walls. The storm of the night before was gone. The pale, cold light of a Seoul dawn spilled across the Han River. Seo Yeon limped into the library, leaning on the cane Dr. Park had given her, her left leg throbbing with every step. Jun-ho sat behind the great desk, one arm held in a sling. His face was grey from blood loss and sleeplessness, but his posture was still straight as a blade, and kneeling on the rug before him, bound tightly, was one of the Baek attackers who had been taken alive the night before. The man spat a mouthful of red onto the floor and sneered. "King of the Han River," he slurred in that rough Gyeongsang accent. "You're looking rather torn apart." Jun-ho did not raise his voice, he only leaned forward, and there was something in his absolute calm more frightening than any rage. "How did you get in last night?" he said. "My system can't be breached from the outside. The biometric gates require the genetic signature of someone within the inner circle. So I will ask once, who opened the door for you?" The prisoner looked at Seo Yeon standing in the doorway, then turned back to Jun-ho. His smile stretched wider with malice. "You still don't understand, do you? We didn't need to break anything. Someone opened it wide for us from the inside. The same person who showed us how to lure the girl out, the one who gave us her schedule, her loneliness, every weakness one by one." Seo Yeon felt the blood drain from her face. Those words fit together with what Ha-yun had confessed like two pieces of the same wound. The person who had messaged Ha-yun online, the one who had known far too much about the world inside these walls. It was not some stranger out there, it was someone in the house. Jun-ho sat very still. Seo Yeon saw something terrible move across his face, not anger, but a cold, painful recognition. The recognition of a man who had just understood he had been betrayed by the very hand he trusted most. "Choi Tai-sung," he whispered. The name fell into the room like a shard of ice. The prisoner laughed out loud, and that was all the confirmation needed. Jun-ho shot to his feet despite his wound. For one moment, Seo Yeon thought he was about to collapse, but he only braced one hand on the desk, his head bowed. "He was with me for 10 years, he said, his voice rough. "He was my right hand. He held Ha-yun in his arms when she was only 7. I trusted him with my sister's life." He lifted his head. Those grey eyes were now hollow with a pain Seo Yeon had never seen before. "And he is the one who handed her to Baek's dogs." One of Jun-ho's men entered, leaned close, and murmured something in his ear. Jun-ho's jaw tightened. He disappeared before the attack began. He told Seo Yeon after the man left, disabled the outer security protocols and ran. By now, he's on his way to the Baek stronghold in Gangwon-do, a private compound across the provincial line. He knows my forces are depleted. He knows I'm wounded. Seo Yeon stepped closer despite the pain in her leg. She placed her hand on his uninjured arm. "Then they'll come back," she said quietly. "Yes," Jun-ho answered. He looked down at her hand on his as though it were the only thing still real in this shattered morning. "And next time they'll come to end everything." 2 weeks later, Dr. Park insisted that the wound in Seo Yan's leg needed imaging more thorough than anything the equipment in the mansion could provide, so she was taken to a discreet private clinic on the northern outskirts of Seoul under the escort of two of Junho's silent men. It was while she sat alone in the empty waiting room with the two guards posted in the hallway outside that a woman walked in. She sat down in the chair beside Seo Yeon as though they had arranged to meet there in advance. She was somewhere in her 40s, wearing a neat grey suit. Her brown hair cut short and practical, her eyes sharp with the focus of someone used to observing people for a living. Han Seo Yeon, the woman said quietly. Not as a question, she opened an identification card in her palm, long enough for Seo Yeon to read it, then folded it shut. Special Agent Yoon Ji-won, National Investigation Bureau. Don't look at the door. Your two friends out there don't need to know we're talking. Seo Yeon's heart began to pound. I have nothing to say. You have more to say than you think, Ji-won replied, her voice calm. We've been watching Kang Junho for years, Ms. Hannah. We know who he is beneath those glass towers, and we know you were in that alley. We know what you witnessed that night and what happened at the Han River Mansion. She leaned a little closer. You're the witness we've been waiting for these past 8 years. Seo Yeon tightened her hands around the edge of her coat. What do you want from me? Your testimony, Ji-won said. That's all. You tell us what you saw. You testify, and in return we put you into witness protection, a completely new identity, a new city, a new name, a new life. Somewhere neither the Baek family nor Kang Junho will ever find you. You'll be safe, Ms. Han. For the first time in your life, you'll truly be safe. And that was exactly why those words cut so deeply, because they were precisely what Seo Yeon had longed for her entire life. Safety, a clean new beginning, a place where no one knew she was the invisible server girl drowning in debt, where no men with guns waited in the dark, where she could simply exist without being afraid. No one had ever offered her a way out before, and now a strange woman was placing one in the palm of her hand. Wrapped up, neat and perfect, Seo Yeon closed her eyes. The image that rose before her was not a new city or a new name. It was Junho throwing himself between her and the gun barrel, his body jerking as the bullet tore through his shoulder, his eyes still fixed on her, even as blood seeped through his fingers. It was Ha-yun burying her face against Seo Yeon's shoulder as she cried, whispering that Seo Yeon had not run away. It was a man sitting in a firelit library, allowing someone to see the wound beneath the ice for the first time in years. You're asking me to betray him, Seo Yeon said softly, opening her eyes. Something almost like pity flickered across Ji-won's face. I'm asking you to save yourself, Miss Han. That man is not a good man. I know what he has done for you. I know he took a bullet for you. But don't mistake gratitude for something that can keep you safe. Men like Kang Junho always lose everyone who stands too close in the end. You've seen that with your own eyes. She stood. She placed a plain white business card with no name on the chair beside Seo Yeon, only a string of numbers. You don't have to decide right now. But this door won't stay open forever. When you're ready to live, call this number. And then she left as quietly as she had come, leaving Seo Yeon alone with the business card in her hand and a struggle opening inside her chest like a second wound, deeper than the cut on her leg.